mentioned, when I was a kid, it was really neat. You were one of the, if not the first insider, right, to kind of come into my living room and talk about you and Will McDonough, really, right, around like that day and age. It was really cool. And this book, Brady versus Belichick, I have not read it yet. I cannot wait to. And I've heard some really good reviews on it so far. So I'm so pumped to get into this with you.
Yeah, you don't want to talk about HBO? That's one of my favorite topics to talk about is those days on Inside the NFL. It was Will McDonough. He was the one. He was the trailblazer for people like myself who were newspaper guys to be able to do the crossover and get on TV when the networks realized that the newspaper guys knew more than anybody else. So it was Will, then it was me, and then it just opened the floodgates after that. But
how was it? How did you end up on Inside the NFL? It was you. It was Nick Bonacani, yourself, right, and Len Dawson. Yeah. How did you end up on that show?
Well, what happened was I was working in Dallas, and it was towards the end of the 1988 season when the Cowboys were 3-13, and they asked me to come on and talk about the problems in Dallas. The team was for sale, and what was going on with Landry, was he could be able to keep his job. So they flew me to New York to come in the studio, and I made a statement. It was kind of a prediction. I mean, I didn't know it was going to happen, but they said, what would you do if you were going to buy the team? And I said, the first thing I would do is call Tom Landry into my office and say, I can't tell you how much I appreciate the 29 years you put in. You're going right in the Ring of Honor. We're going to put a statue of you in front of the Texas Stadium, but I'm a new owner. Team has been on the slide. I'm going to start over here. And I would tell him, we'll do anything we can to honor you, make it seem like it was your decision, et cetera. And, about 6 weeks later, Jerry Jones buys the team. He didn't quite do it as tactfully as I would have, but that's exactly what he did. So they must have thought I was pretty smart. And they asked me to join the cast that September and be on every week. And I was there for 13 years. So it was a lot of fun.
And you, part of your coverage around the NFL, you made your bones in New York for a lot of it, covering the Giants as a columnist for the Daily News. So that leads me to my first question around this book. You're uniquely qualified to talk about both of these people because of the book you did about Manning and Brady. And now you've covered Belichick for, we're talking almost 40 years, probably.
Right.
What was his role? How instrumental was he to the Giants winning those 2 Super Bowls?
Well, it was early on, a year or so after Parcells was named the head coach in '83, that he realized that Belichick was something special. When he became defensive coordinator in '81, he had gone to Ray Perkins, who was then the Giants head coach, and asked if he can borrow Belichick a little bit to help out on defense. Bill was working with special teams, and their office, or I think it was just desks at that point, were right next to each other. Maybe they had one office for the 2 of them. That's what it was. And so they got to know each other really well, which led to Bill asking Perkins, can I use him more than, just for special teams that you're using him? And I'm trying to remember, I have it in my Once a Giant book, what year Bill became the defensive coordinator of the Giants, but he was extremely instrumental because Parcells really gave him complete autonomy over the defense. Even though Parcells himself was the defensive coach, he would give Belichick suggestions every now and then, but it was mainly Belichick, and the players realized how smart he was.
Yeah, and I think that's important information as we move into the Brady Belichick topic, because sometimes I don't know that people have the full body of work, right? That like the coaching genius that Bill Belichick was before, he ended up with Tom Brady. In your reporting, did you find that it was kind of respect or resentment that was the stronger force driving the relationship between Belichick and Brady?
That's a great question. And the way I would answer that is that it evolved. It started off as complete respect that Brady had for Belichick and gratitude as well, because, he drafted him in the 6th round, even though he wasn't the one who was pushing for it. It was Dick Rabine, who was the quarterback coach. But Belichick is the one who was in charge of the draft, and then he made the decision to keep Brady as a four-string quarterback. Now, a lot of that was driven by finances because the Patriots were in a horrible salary cap situation, and a sixth-round quarterback on his rookie deal was cheap labor. So, and he saw enough of him in training camp that summer that he wanted to keep him around. And then, of course, it was, Belichick made the decision that after Drew Bledsoe was ready to play again 2 months after he was seriously hurt, early in the second game of the 0-1 season, he decided to stick with Brady. And, it evolved from that point. But certainly at that juncture, Brady was extremely respectful of Belichick. And Belichick, I guess you would say it was respect. It grew over the years. At first, it was much more like, hey, kid, you do what I say. And then realizing that Tom was, a pretty bright guy who would see things that Belichick wouldn't necessarily see just because he was on the field. And it was a great relationship early on. And the dynasty, Pete, is really two separate dynasties broken up into 10-year periods where they won 3 Super Bowls in each of the 10 years. I think as we got to the second phase of it, it became somewhat resentment on the part of Brady that Belichick never would treat him any differently than he did as a rookie, which means that he picked on him a lot. Bill had a method to what he was doing because he knew if he can pick on a guy that won 3 Super Bowls and he wouldn't complain, then he can pick on anybody. But after about 10 or 12 years of that and 3 Super Bowls and 5 Super Bowl appearances, Brady began to resent that. And basically it was, hey, coach, go find somebody else. Hey, buddy, leave me alone. And I think that Belichick started to resent Brady because I think the general feeling at that point that it was a Brady-driven team, much more so than it was early on.
Did Bill have the mindset that, because you mentioned it, that was a very unpopular move at the time when he decided to stick with Brady over Bledsoe?
Well, not necessarily. Let me just interject here. Not necessarily.
Sure.
I mean, Bledsoe. I've been doing this, all these interviews, all the Brady, Belichick, Bledsoe. Bledsoe definitely had his guys in the locker room because he had been there for 9 years already. But in talking to a lot of the players, they just wanted to win. And although they weren't undefeated with Brady, he had shown them something. He was getting rid of the ball faster than Bledsoe was. He wasn't throwing bad interceptions like Bledsoe had done. So when it came time to make the decision, it didn't split the team as you might think under different circumstances, because they had been 5-11 with Bledsoe the year before. They lost their opener against Cincinnati, and all of a sudden this kid comes in and he has him in playoff contention, and Bledsoe's ready to take his job back. And Belichick says, no, I'm not doing that. And so it was probably the most important and certainly the biggest decision that Belichick ever made. But, with the benefit of the time, when we look back on it, maybe it wasn't so tough.
Do you think that Belichick expected Tom to be grateful that he had anointed him the starter back then and had drafted him, and that maybe that's why he wasn't quick to allow him to sort of graduate right from that school of a guy he was always going to pick? Because did he always pick on, I guess that was more Bill Belichick, but was there another player? I mean, Bill Parcells. See, now I'm doing it.
Parcells picked on everybody.
Yeah, he picked on everybody, right? But so did Belichick treat Brady like everybody else, or did he treat Willie McGinnis better than he treated Tom Brady?
I think he treated Brady much more harsh than he treated a guy like McGinnis or some of the other upper echelon players on the Patriots, because there was more to pick on with Brady early on because he was a young quarterback kind of just feeling his way. And then when he realized that Tom did appreciate being coached hard, and that never changed. He didn't mind being coached hard. He just minded when Belichick was making an example out of him. He'd throw 4 touchdowns and they'd win 35-7. And all Belichick would do in the meeting on Monday morning was talk about the 1 interception that he threw. And so I think that, Brady wound up resenting that. What was going on is that Belichick realized, because Brady wasn't publicly complaining to him or even privately complaining, that it set an example for the rest of the team so that nobody can complain. If Brady wasn't complaining and had his, a starting corner or running back, how do they complain if Brady's not? So, and Brady realized what Belichick was doing. It's just that he got tired of it. And Tom, like in my talks with Tom, he never said to me, well, why is he treating me like this? But, like to use your Willie McGinnis example, but he wasn't doing that to Willie, at least to the extent. I'm sure if Willie made a mistake, he was picking on him.
Yeah.
But Brady was like the poster boy for taking it, and being allowing Belichick to coach him hard without complaining. But like I keep saying, after, winning 3 Super Bowls, and I think that it all changed really after the Seattle Super Bowl.
Yeah.
When they won that game and Brady had the great fourth quarter and Belichick got lucky not calling a timeout and Pete Carroll made the stupidest play call in the history of sports. I think at that point, Brady said, I've had enough, but Belichick just never changed.
One more on what we were just talking about, and then I want to move forward with you into what you were just talking about. When you look at Brady as a person, as a competitor, as a man, did Belichick know how to push his buttons to make him that great? For example, like was staying on him and ribbing him and making an example out of him after throwing those 4 touchdowns. Did he know something about Tom Brady that maybe we didn't or other coaches didn't?
Well, I think what he knew, Pete, was that he could take it and that he had thick skin and that he did like to be coached hard. But the problem in their relationship was that Bill never transitioned away from that. And Brady did reach the point where he didn't need that anymore. I think it definitely drove him to reach the level that he did. There's no doubt in my mind that the way Belichick handled him early on drove Brady to be the greatest quarterback of all time. But Belichick never, realized that Tom had reached a point where he didn't appreciate that anymore. And he wanted Belichick to treat him differently. And and all the people I spoke to, I just never got the impression that Tom went to Belichick and told him to back off. He probably just thought at some point Bill's going to realize, I don't need this anymore. But that just never really happened. And the one who's really outspoken about it is Tom Brady Sr.
Oh, yeah. So what did you glean from him?
Well, and I thought he had a great line that with Belichick, the way he looked at Tom was expectation and not appreciation. And there needed to be both. And Tom Sr. just felt that Belichick believed that he had interchangeable parts and that he can win without Brady if need be, which we know, in through Belichick's history is just not true. So I think, Pete, I've always felt, and I know Tom really well, and that's just my way of saying that I think that Tom Sr. verbalized what Tom was thinking himself and surely had told his dad because they're best friends. But Tom, the quarterback, felt it would never have been correct for him to go public with it.
Yeah.
And his dad, his dad is great. I love his dad. Yeah. And he's a loose cannon, which is great, for me, and I just felt like Tom never said to his dad, other than when he went public and called Roger Goodell a liar, when his dad called him a liar, that Tom never went to his father and said, back off. There were times that he did that, but he never gave him a gag order.
Yeah, I'm getting what you're saying here totally, and that's voicing his son's opinion and sentiments. That brings me to my next question.
Yeah,
you and all the coverage you did with this book, talking to all the people you did with the strong relationships you had inside the NFL. Was there a moment or a story that you had not heard of before that was sort of something you uncovered that you were like, wow, this says a lot about how these two guys felt about each other? Anything I'm not trying to give away all the secrets in the book, but anything that you found out that surprised you, Gary Myers, you're like, wow, this is something else.
Well, not necessarily. Well, I did a book, Brady versus Manning, that came out in 2015.
Mhm.
And, I spoke to Tom for a really long period of time doing that book. And so I think this interview I'm going to refer to was probably like 2012, somewhere around there, 13. And I said to him, has there ever been, and they used to meet on Tuesday nights every week throughout Tom's career. And I said, was there ever a point where you're meeting a Tuesday night, it's 10 o'clock, you looked at each other and you say, okay, we're going over the game plan. We got this. We're under control. Let's go drive up Route 1 and go, share a pizza and a pitcher of beer together or something like that. And just kind of kick back a little bit because you guys had already accomplished so much together. And he said, never happens. Now, that's not that unusual because coaches and players don't usually socialize together, but they'd been together for over 10 years at that point. And you'd think that maybe they would have, appreciate each other outside the work environment.
Well,
And
it reminds me of that other team that you covered with Troy Aikman and Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy saw that Troy probably needed that personal connection, and they go shopping for fish, and the rest is history, right?
Yeah, I mean, Jimmy was really a smart guy.
Yeah.
And Belichick is obviously also, but Jimmy was much better with the interpersonal relationships. And he knew he had a problem. I don't mean to get off the track here, but he knew he had a problem with Troy because of the whole Steve Walsh situation, if you remember, where he drafted Walsh in supplemental draft. He was his quarterback at Miami, and Troy really resented that. And so it was like 2 years in, and he decided, he realized that Jimmy was really into fish tanks and the aquariums and all that stuff. And Troy had expressed an interest in it. So Jimmy went over to Troy's house one night. They ordered all the stuff for Troy to get an aquarium going in his house. And they bonded over guppies, and goldfish. I mean, that's really true. That's what happened. And they are best friends now. In fact, the only area of friction is when they bring up Jimmy leaving after winning back-to-back. And Jimmy told me this story for one of my books, that they were sitting together having a beer one night, which Brady and Belichick never had. And Troy, and this is after that the Patriots had won like 4 or 5 of these things. And Troy looked at Jimmy and he said to him, and it wasn't with love in his eyes, it was almost like, damn you, Jimmy. And he goes, we could have been Brady and Belichick. And they could have. I think they would have won 4 in a row because they won 2 in a row with Jimmy. They got to the NFC Championship game the next year with Switzer. Enough said, I don't even know to tell you.
And they win one with Switzer. Yeah.
And then they won it. The next one was Switzer. So Switzer could have won back-to-back easily. I'm convinced that Jimmy would have won that year that they lost to the Niners in the championship game. And then if Switzer can win a Super Bowl the next year, then certainly Jimmy would have won it. So that's 4 right there. And who knows how many more. They would have been considered the greatest team in NFL history. So,
I agree. Yeah.
So, Jimmy telling me that story about Troy, I thought was really eye-opening that he was, we could have been Brady and Belichick. But the other thing is that I asked Tom was, have you and Bill ever talked about what you accomplished together? Now, you see how complimentary they've been of each other since the separation. But that level of appreciation was never verbalized when they were together. And I think it's because Belichick wasn't that kind of guy. And if Brady wanted to say it, he just probably thought it was never appropriate. So I don't think there was they never expressed to each other what they meant to each other until Belichick basically kicked him out the door in 2020.
This is so interesting, Gary. I appreciate you taking the time to do this. When you're putting a book like this together and you get to the part about, Robert Kraft, right, and his involvement with these 2 individuals, was there a moment in time, because it certainly seems like to me that Kraft, Team Brady, right, they end up being together. Was there a moment in time where that transition, where maybe Kraft was in between these 2 individuals and he said, oh, okay, Tom is the guy I want to hitch my wagon to. And was any of that personal, right? Like did Kraft feel like Belichick maybe wouldn't give him the access, or, maybe he felt the same way that Tom felt. Like, was there any bonding between those two, Brady and Kraft, over the way or the type of person that Belichick was or is?
Well, you've seen the back and forth between Belichick and Kraft in the last few years, where clearly it ended very poorly in New England for their relationship. But what I found really interesting, now you remember in the 2017 Super Bowl, Philadelphia against New England, where Belichick benched Malcolm Butler and still hasn't explained why. And that was at the root of a lot of the problems there. He never explained why. And then Nick Foles, a career backup, and I like using the term, he threw a party against the Patriot defense in that Super Bowl. And Butler, who played 99% of the snaps in the AFC Championship game 2 weeks earlier, played one special team snap the entire game. When he came in, I think it was for Devin McCourty, for whatever reason, for one play in the game. And he stood on the sidelines. He was crying during the national anthem. Everybody thought he was emotional because of the anthem. He was crying because he knew he wasn't going to play. So anyway, after that Super Bowl, where Belichick's getting all the criticism for not playing Butler and then never explaining it, Kraft basically put Belichick on double secret probation going into the 2018 season. And Pete, I don't know this for sure, but if the Patriots didn't have a good season in 2018, I think he would have fired Belichick. So what happens? Not only do they win the Super Bowl, but they win against the Rams that were, scoring a ton, just like that Rams team they beat in their first Super Bowl, the greatest show on turf. This was like the second, the incarnation of the greatest show on turf with Sean McVay. So New England wins that Super Bowl 13-3. Belichick plays zone that game when they played man-to-man the whole season. The McVay, the offensive genius, never adjusted. And Kraft is thinking after the game, well, maybe this guy's not done. He's still got a lot of gas left in the tank. He's still a genius. So the next summer is when they had the confrontation where Brady wanted an extension, and Belichick is telling Kraft, hey, Robert, he doesn't have much left. This can go at any time. And we can't commit all this money and years that Tom wants. So Kraft, in a decision that he's come to really regret, sided with Belichick. And what he did was, Tom had 1 year to go in his contract, and he agreed to cut the year off his contract and not make him, and they couldn't franchise him. It's kind of like what he did with Parcells when Parcells was so unhappy. He got rid of the last year of the contract. Yeah. But he didn't give up his rights to him, because we know that he had to make a deal with the Jets. The Jets had to make a deal with him to get Parcells, but because he loved Brady and considered him, he really considers him his fifth son. He said, okay, Tommy, I'm not going to stand in your way. You can be a free agent next year. He decided to side with Belichick because he thought Belichick had more years left in him. And then, of course, Brady goes in and wins the Super Bowl the first year in Tampa. And Kraft says, hey, what did I do? I picked the wrong guy,
What about this is such great stuff. When you look at these two guys, like Belichick and Brady, and how they separated, right? Like, I feel like, well, let me ask you this. How did Belichick respond to you writing the book? And when you reach out to him for comment, like, he knows you, like, you have a different relationship with him than most writers. So how does he respond to someone like you writing a book like this?
Well, I can say I've known him since 1979,
wow.
Which just shows how old I am.
Was he with Baltimore then?
No, he was with the Giants.
He was with the Giants. Okay, yeah.
He was on the Giants' first staff.
Okay.
For Ray Perkins.
Okay.
So I've known him since 79. I never had what I portray as a close relationship with him. He treated me like everybody else, which meant poorly for the most part, especially once he got to Cleveland. I mean, he was just a pain to deal with. And then when Deflategate happened, when Spygate happened in 2007, and I was writing for the Daily News, it was a great tabloid story. I mean, You couldn't ask for anything more than Spygate and Deflategate. The Patriots were almost considered our third team because we just were writing so much about them.
Yeah.
And, New York fans hated them. So in 2007, I was really tattooing Belichick over Spygate. any chance I had, I ripped him. It was kind of fun. And I know it bothered him because anytime I was up in New England, he would have to answer my questions in a press conference. But if it was more than 6 words, it was a lot. So I had a really bad relationship with him for 13 years. I mean, I didn't necessarily have a bad relationship with him. I had no relationship with him. So Pete, this is actually a pretty funny story. Hope I'm not going too long on this.
No, this is please.
Okay. So 2020, I'm on the Hall of Fame committee, the voting committee. I've been on that since like 2010. And they formed a special committee in 2020 to pick the centennial class for the Hall of Fame. It was going to be 10 seniors instead of 3, and then 2 coaches instead of 1, and then a handful of contributors. And it was a committee of 25. We would pick the finalists, and then our entire committee would then vote on it, which was mainly a formality. So they picked a committee of 25, which included 12 out of the normal 50 voters from our regular committee. So I was very honored that they picked me. I knew Belichick was on this committee. And 2 days or 3 days before we were going to meet in Canton after the 2020 wild card round, Belichick and the Patriots and Brady lose to the Titans in the wild card game, which turned out to be Tom's last game.
Yeah.
So I walk into the conference room in Canton, and they had a dinner the night before for the voters, but Belichick wasn't there because he was doing the exit interviews in New England. And a friend of mine, Barry Wilner, is sitting at a table, and it was like a horse-shaped table. So Barry's sitting there, and there's 2 seats empty next to his left. So I usually sit next to Barry at these meetings, and he had saved me a seat. So I go to sit down, and I see that there's a red loose leaf binder, it might have been blue, next to me. And I didn't know who it belonged to. And the guy 2 to my left says, Bill is sitting there. And I thought he was talking about Bill Polian. So I said, oh, Polian and I get along great. That'd be fun to sit next to him for 8 hours. He goes, no, it's Belichick. And I go, oh, yeah. And so I'm thinking, these meetings are long. And if you kind of chat with the guy next to you during the breaks, it makes it even longer. So I decide I'm going to be the big one here. And when he goes to sit down, I'm going to stand up, extend my hand, and say, hey, Bill, it's good to see you. Sorry how your season ended. Pete, I'm telling you, I'm not exaggerating. We had the best time.
Wow.
We had the best time. He was so good on some of these older players that people of, my generation have heard of but didn't know anything about. He was really curious about the whole process, like, why wasn't Kraft a finalist, and how come Tagliabue hadn't gotten into this point? So anytime we had a break, we would just kind of tell him stories, and I saw the side of him that his friends of his had promised me existed, but I had never seen myself in all the years I've known him. So ever since that point, we took a team picture afterwards, and we stood next to each other, and ever since that, he gave me his email address, and he said, hey, let's just stay in touch. And so I would text him, I would email him a little bit during the season. The morning of one of the season openers, I think it was in 2021, maybe, he's got a 4:00 game on the season opener. He mails me like at 10 o'clock in the morning that day and says, how come such and such isn't a finalist? He wasn't on the regular committee, but we had gone through the next year's process. And he's asking me like why a guy isn't a finalist. And I'm going, I can't believe the guy is, the season is starting in 6 hours, and he's emailing me about, the Hall of Fame vote.
That's a hardcore football guy that wants this thing to be done right. That's so cool, right?
Yeah. So when I did my Once a Giant book, it was really crucial for me to interview him.
Yeah.
And I had his email address, and I said, Bill, I will come meet you at 2:00 in the morning at the end of your day, 6:00 in the morning if that's when it starts. I'll meet you at the lunch break, whatever you want to do. I just need 20 minutes with you. And he said to me, I'm not afraid of talking to you about this subject. I love talking about the Giants. He goes, but I promise you, I will be more helpful to you and give you better answers if we can do this on email. And I said, boy, I really like to do things face to face or on the phone if that's my only option. email. I've never done an interview on email. He goes, you send me the questions, and I promise you I'll answer every one of them, and I won't answer them in one sentence. So I said, fine. And I said, you don't have to give it to me next week. Your deadline is in 4 months. And so he sends it to me after about 3 months, and he goes, sorry for the delay. And he sent me about 2,000 words.
Wow.
Answering my 15 questions.
This is all about the 86 Giants, right? The 86 in the 90s, right? Yeah.
The only question he wouldn't answer was, Bill, whatever you think your best Patriot team has been over the last 20 some odd years, how do you think they would have stacked up against the 86 Giants? And I'm really just asking you in that question to compare eras. And he says, I have no idea. Now, of course, he had an answer to that, but he was still coaching the Patriots. And I would think the 07 team was his best team, even though they lost that Super Bowl to the Giants. That was the undefeated team, but he wouldn't answer it. So now I'm doing this book.
Yeah, this is a little bit more of a hyperbolic topic, right?
Yeah. And I'm thinking, there's no way. Bill, I'll meet you in Boston. I'll meet you in Nantucket. I'll meet you in Chapel Hill, wherever. He goes, can we do it like we did last time? Just send me questions. I said, boy, this is one, your name's in the title of this book. I really need to meet with you. And he goes, the only way I'll do this is by email. So I'm not going to say no. It's not how I wanted to do it. But I figured, what the heck? He was great with me on email. And Pete, he was terrific. And so that's how I interviewed him for this book.
All right, so I got two more for you, and they'll be quick.
Okay, go.
And I know I don't want you to give anything away, but I have from reading about the book, I've kind of come to understand that you believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Brady was probably more important to this union, right? Than Belichick. Can you give me a Cliff's Notes of why?
Yeah, because I always think the great quarterback is more important than the great coach. And I don't take into consideration what happened after they separated, because I think that's irrelevant to the argument. It's really, the debate is who's responsible for what they did together. And I think people tend to have a recency bias if they're counting what happened after they split. Maybe that takes part of the equation, or they're counting the last 10 years that I think was really dominated by Brady. They're forgetting what happened at the beginning. So to me, it's not necessarily who do you give the credit to, because I think anybody would give it to Brady, the majority of the credit to Brady. I think that's the objective way of looking at it. But the issue really is, what percentage do you assign to each one in the overall 20 years? And that's where I think I take the strongest stand on who deserves the credit. It's not 80-10. That's disrespectful to Belichick. But it's not 50-50, and it's not 55-45. So it's more than that, but it's not a landslide without giving away the exact percentages. Okay.
And here's the last one for you. And this isn't a fun one for me to ask or for you to have to answer, but is Bill Belichick right now on, October 7th, 2025, is he chipping away at that legacy of his? Is he dismantling that? I mean, from one of the best football coaches ever in the NFL to a pedestrian college coach as of right now. But what are your thoughts?
Well, nothing he can do at North Carolina can impact his legacy from New England. That's in the books. I think we can probably agree on that.
Yeah.
But his legacy overall, which is more than New England, which is what happened before New England, which is what happened after Tom left New England, and certainly what's happening both professionally and personally for him now, I think that absolutely impacts his legacy. I think it's much too early to say he's going to be remembered as a pedestrian college coach. What is he, 5 games into it?
5 games into it. And that's my next question. Do you think he'll stick with it?
I think he will, because he's very prideful and he's got a huge ego, and he's not going to walk away. If they win 4 games this year, he's not going to walk away and throw up in the white towel and say, I can't do this. I'm not saying he's going to ever compete for a playoff spot.
Yeah.
I follow college football, but mainly just Michigan, because my son went there, and I'm a huge Michigan fan. So I don't know enough about the ins and outs of the ACC and what the NIL money is and whether he's got enough to compete, where North Carolina is on that spectrum. But I will say this. He knows he's got to get himself a quarterback. He knows he's got to build a team around the quarterback. And I'm not going to say he's not going to be able to do that. I'm not willing to admit that. But nothing that's happened this year is helping him. And I mean, in terms of his getting blown out every time they play, a quality opponent, and what's happening in his personal life. I'm not going to stay in judgment and say he's going out with a 24-year-old woman. To each his own. They're two consenting adults. Yeah. It's just, in my opinion, it's a bad look for him to be dating somebody who's young enough to be his granddaughter.
I love when you go on Chris Russo when you're on with Mad Dog, and he said it all for me once. He just said, little much. That's that's it. Hey, Gary Myers, the book is Brady versus Belichick. Gary, you're a legend. Thank you so much for the time.
I don't know about being a legend, people. I appreciate you asking me to come on.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk soon, man. Thanks so much, Gary.
Take care.